In the year 2841, Earth was dying not from famine or plague, but from something far worse. The Karnak swarm, a race of insect-like aliens, had appeared from the edge of the galaxy without warning, consuming colonies and outposts with horrifying speed. Earth's proud fleets had fought back, but the swarm was endless, and every battle lost more lives than the last. Desperate, the leaders of the Solar Accord sent a final message to the stars, pleading for help from their galactic allies. They waited. Hours turned into days, and days into weeks. No answers came. One by one, the outer colonies fell silent. The skies above Earth grew quiet, haunted by the distant flicker of enemy ships. Captain Celine Dre, commander of the last operational defense fleet, stood in the high observation tower of the Accord command hub, watching the darkness beyond the moon. She had scars on her face from past wars, eyes like cold fire, and a growing sense that they had been abandoned. Her officers brought her daily reports: more destruction, more death, more silence. Then, one evening, a signal came not from an ally, but from deep space, encrypted in a language older than the Accord itself. Celine's crew decoded it with trembling hands. The signal did not say, "We are coming to help." It said, "We heard your scream." The coordinates pointed to a dead zone beyond the Keeper Belt, a region no sane pilot entered. Some said it was cursed. Others said it was empty. But something was there now. Celine made the call. With the High Council paralyzed by fear, she ordered her fleet's remaining scout ships to investigate. What they found changed everything. From the shadows emerged massive, blackened ships, spiked, scarred, and ancient. Their hulls bore the forgotten sigils of human war clans lost centuries ago, exiled for their crimes, presumed dead or worse. These were the dread fleet of Varkos, survivors of 1,000 forgotten wars, held together by blood oaths and madness. They answered to no nation, only to war. Their leader, Warlord Gaius Ren, sent a simple message: "We are not your allies. We are what your enemies fear you might become." Celine knew then that hope had not arrived, something far more dangerous had. The council protested, calling it madness to trust these exiles. But Earth had no choice. The swarm was nearly here, and Celine knew the Dread Fleet was humanity's final card. She granted them orbital access, and the WarClan ships descended like crows to a battlefield. Civilians screamed as the Black War hulks hovered over cities, casting long shadows on streets below. Soldiers in jagged armor disembarked, dragging old-world weapons and machines that looked more like torture devices than tools of war. Celine met Ren in person. He was tall, bald, and missing one eye, his voice cold and deep. He asked for no welcome. He demanded no thanks. "You gave us a battlefield," he said. "That's enough." At first, Earth's defenders resisted the Dread Fleet's methods. They saw how Ren's warriors turned captured Karnaks into biological traps, how they salvaged ruined ships and fused them into monstrous weapons. But something else happened too. The tide began to shift. The Karnaks were still coming, but now they died in greater numbers. For every city they attacked, the Dread Fleet responded with fury. Celine watched as civilians, once helpless, began to learn from the war clans. Old rules crumbled. Survival came first. Soon, Earth was no longer waiting for help. It was preparing for vengeance. One night, as the sky above burned with the wreckage of another Karnak's assault ship, Celine looked again at the stars. She knew what was coming. The main Hive fleet had not yet arrived, and the next battle would decide everything. But she also knew something else. When Earth had called, no friends had come. Only the Ruthless had answered. Only the ones shaped by endless war. And maybe, she thought, that's what humanity had needed all along. Not peace. Not allies. Just the will to endure. Just the monsters who remembered how to survive. The Dread Fleet's arrival over Earth stirred unease across the planet. The once proud cities now felt like cages, their people caught between two threats, one alien and one human. Captain Celine Dre stood on the command deck of the flagship Resolute, staring out at the jagged ships of the war clans. hovering in low orbit. The Varkos fleet was unlike anything Earth scientists had seen in centuries. Colossal war machines built from the wreckage of ancient battles, blackened hulls scarred by weapons older than history itself, and painted with symbols that spoke of pain, blood, and endless fighting. Warlord Gaius Ren's voice echoed through the command bridge, harsh, low, and commanding. "We did not come to save you. We came because we smelled blood, and war calls to us like a hunting wolf." The council had begged Selene to eject the war clans from orbit, to send them back into the void before they destroyed what little was left of Earth's fragile civilization. But she refused. The Karnak's attacks were growing fiercer, their hive ships closing in like hungry beasts. Without the Dread Fleet's brutal tactics, Earth would fall. As Ren's soldiers poured onto the planet, cities braced for a new kind of invasion, one where human and human would clash almost as fiercely as human and Karnaks. The Dread Fleet didn't behave like soldiers. They acted like predators, breaking through enemy lines with savage efficiency, hunting Karnaks' nests and tearing them down piece by piece. Their weapons were cruel and ancient, designed not for mercy but for total annihilation. Civilians watched in horror as captured Karnaks were turned into living bombs, their bodies wired with explosives and sent back into enemy tunnels, exploding in a wave of death and fire. Earth's regular forces balked at these tactics, but the results were undeniable. The Karnaks were pushed back for the first time in years. Even Selene felt the dark thrill of victory, though it was tainted by the cost. The Dread Fleet's warriors claimed no prisoners. They offered no quarter. When they entered a town, they burned it to the ground to deny the swarm any shelter. Their merciless ways disturbed the citizens, but also sparked a new hope, a savage hope that perhaps this war could be won by embracing the ruthless spirit of those forgotten by time. Ren himself walked the shattered streets with a cold gaze, inspecting the ruins as if sizing up an old enemy. His one remaining eye was sharp, filled with memories of battles and betrayals, of loyalty and loss. "This world is weak," he said quietly to Selene during one tense meeting in the ruins of a once great city. "But it can be made strong. If you learn to fight like us, you will live." Selene listened, her heart torn between fear and respect. She knew Ren was right. Earth's old ways were broken. Diplomacy, rules of engagement, honor all had failed against the Karnaks. Now, only survival mattered. But survival came at a price. Tensions rose among Earth's defenders as soldiers clashed over tactics and loyalties. Some called the Dread Fleet saviors, others saw them as monsters. The lines between friend and enemy blurred. In the middle of this chaos, a new threat emerged. The Karnak's queen herself had sent a warning across the void, a psychic scream that chilled every mind who heard it. She was coming, and her arrival would be unlike anything humanity had faced before. Ren prepared his war clans for the fight of their lives. "The queen is not just a beast," he warned Selene in the war room. "She is the end of all things. If we cannot stop her, this world will burn." Selene realized that the war was no longer just about defense. It was about transformation. Earth had become a battleground where ancient warriors and desperate survivors fought side by side, learning from each other in blood and fire. The people who had once feared the Dread Fleet now whispered their names with grudging respect. The wolves had come to the gate, and with them, a new era of war had begun. As night fell over the battered planet, Selene stood once more on the command deck, watching the stars blink cold and distant beyond the broken moon. She knew the real battle was coming and that this war would test the soul of humanity itself. But for the first time in a long time, Earth was no longer waiting for help. It was ready to fight. The threat of the Karnak's queen hung heavy over Earth's battered defenses, like a dark storm waiting to break. The Dread Fleet, with its jagged warships and hardened warriors, had shifted the balance, but now the war had grown bigger, deadlier, and more desperate than ever before. Captain Selene Dre, now more than ever, felt the weight of command settle deep inside her chest. The enemy was no longer a swarm of insects, but a force. Led by a monstrous queen, a living nightmare that could crush entire worlds with psychic power alone. The skies above Earth were restless, filled with the flicker of distant explosions and the constant drone of war engines. From the command deck of the Resolute, Celine watched the stars with narrowed eyes, her thoughts racing faster than the ships on the tactical screen before her. She knew that if the Queen arrived and found Earth weak, humanity would not survive. The only way to stand a chance was to fight her far from the planet, to draw her away from the cities and the people who had already suffered so much. It was a dangerous plan, one that risked everything, but it was the only hope. Warlord Gaius, Ren agreed. The Dread Fleet was built for this kind of brutal space warfare, a nightmare born from 1,000 forgotten wars. Ren's ships were old and savage, patched together from scraps of lost battles, but they were fast and deadly. They knew how to strike hard and vanish before the enemy could respond. When Celine proposed the plan to take the fight into deep space, many of Earth's remaining commanders doubted her. They wanted to defend the planet at all costs, to hold the last lines in orbit. But Celine and Ren insisted that the Karnak's Queen would bring her full power to Earth's orbit, and that meant death on a scale humanity could not withstand. The fleets gathered in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, a dangerous zone filled with drifting rocks and debris, perfect for ambushes and hidden traps. The Dread Fleet moved through the field like ghosts, cloaked and silent. Celine's vessel, the Resolute, led the human contingent, a blend of old Accord ships and newly converted civilian vessels armed with scavenged weapons. The tension on board was thick, every crew member feeling the sting of fear and hope at the same time. Days passed as they waited, scanning for signs of the Queen's approach. The silence was broken only by the distant signals of smaller Karnak ships hunting for survivors or scouting the defenses. Then, suddenly, the silence shattered. The asteroid belt erupted with explosions. The Karnaks had arrived. The battle was chaos. Jagged explosions lit the darkness as Karnak's vessels crashed against the rocks or were torn apart by plasma fire. Ren's warriors moved like wolves in the void, striking fast and vanishing before the enemy could regroup. Celine directed the fleet with sharp precision, dodging deadly volleys and sending fighter squadrons to key points. The old tactics of the Accord gave way to something new: hit and run, guerrilla warfare in space. The Dread Fleet's brutality was clear. They made no mercy. Every Karnak ship destroyed was left as a wreck, a graveyard in the void. But the losses among humans were high too. Ships exploded, sending fragments hurtling into the darkness, lives lost in the blink of an eye. The tension aboard the Resolute grew unbearable. The crew worked in shifts, faces pale and hands steady despite exhaustion. Celine knew she had to be strong. The crew looked to her, hoping for a leader who could hold them together. In the middle of the fighting, a terrible message came. Warlord Ren was hit. His flagship had been struck by a massive Karnak's energy blast. The damage was severe. Celine barely had time to process the news before a distress call came from the Dread Fleet command ship. Ren's voice, rough and strained, came over the comms. "Celine, you must take command. The clans need a speaker." The title shocked everyone. The Dread Fleet did not answer to any human government, but now its leader was calling on her to be their voice. The speaker of the clans was more than a commander. It was a symbol, a bridge between savage warriors and fragile humans. Taking the role meant Celine had to walk a path few humans had ever dared. The next hours were a whirlwind. Celine gathered the warlords and commanders in a shadowed war room aboard the battered flagship. Faces hardened by centuries of violence studied her silently. She spoke with honesty, admitting her fears but also her determination. "We stand together or we fall apart," she said. The clans responded with grunts and nods. They accepted her not as a gentle leader, but as one willing to fight with them, to embrace the savage truths of war. As speaker, Celine had to learn fast. She was introduced to the rituals of the clans, the brutal tests of strength, the oaths of blood, the harsh codes that bound them. She felt the weight of their history and the terrible power in their unity. The Dread Fleet was no longer just a tool. It was a living force, and she had become its heart. Meanwhile, the Karnak's Queen loomed closer, her psychic scream reaching through the void like a warning bell. The Queen's power was terrifying. It twisted. minds, shattered defenses, and corrupted the will of weaker beings. To face her was to face madness. Selene and Ren devised a desperate plan, a direct strike at the heart of the Karnak's fleet before the Queen could land her forces on Earth. It was a gamble. They gathered every ship, every weapon, every piece of ancient technology scavenged from lost battles. The fleet moved like a storm, racing toward the looming shadow of the Queen's ship, a monstrous biomechanical horror the size of a small moon, covered in living metal and dripping with alien light. The battle was like nothing Selene had ever seen. Space twisted and turned as ships crashed, exploded, and vanished in clouds of radiation. The Resolute weaved through the chaos, firing on targets of opportunity, dodging psychic blasts that shook the very minds of the crew. The Dread Fleet's warriors fought with ruthless precision, boarding enemy vessels in brutal close combat, turning alien machines into burning wrecks. At one point, Selene herself led a boarding party onto a Karnak's cruiser, the corridors dark and alive with the hiss of alien life. They fought hand to hand, the stench of alien blood thick in the air. She saw soldiers fall, friends die, but the crew pushed forward. Every inch gained was a victory. But the cost was high. Ren was severely wounded during the fight, nearly killed when a Karnak psychic blast tore through his ship. His absence left a void, but Selene stood firmer, pushing the fleet to fight harder. She knew the war was more than just a battle. It was a test of humanity's soul. In the final moments of the battle, Selene faced the Queen's ship alone. The great alien monster pulsed with dark energy, its psychic voice reaching into her mind, trying to break her will. But Selene held firm, calling on the strength of the Dread Fleet, the hope of Earth, and the will to survive. With a desperate cry, she piloted her ship deep into the heart of the alien behemoth. Explosions ripped through the hull, and the Resolute shattered in a storm of fire. But the Queen's ship was mortally wounded. As Selene's vessel broke apart, a final psychic scream echoed a call to reinforcements beyond the known stars. The battle was not over. The survivors of the fleet watched in stunned silence, knowing that even this victory had come at a terrible price. Earth was safe for now, but the future was dark. The Dread Fleet had shown humanity its true face, not the peaceful explorers of the Accord, but the ruthless survivors forged in war's fire. Selene's journey had only begun. The void was vast, filled with horrors yet to come. But as the stars blinked cold and distant, one truth remained clear: humanity would not fall without a fight. And in the endless night, the blood of warriors would light the way. The ruins of the last battle still hung heavy in the air, and Earth's battered defenders were far from victory. Captain Selene Dre, now firmly the speaker of the Dread Fleet, felt the cold weight of responsibility pressing on her more than ever. The war had changed from a fight for survival into a brutal test of endurance and spirit. The Karnak's Queen's defeat had been a momentary victory, but the threat was far from over. In the dark reaches of space, where stars blinked like distant eyes watching a cruel game, the remnants of the Karnaks huddled and recovered, gathering strength for what they promised would be a fiery return. The scars of war were everywhere, burned-out starships, floating like ghosts, battered fleets struggling to regroup, and desperate soldiers haunted by loss. On Earth, cities lay shattered, their people wary and broken, yet stubbornly clinging to hope. But the arrival of the Dread Fleet had brought a new kind of fire, a savage flame that refused to die. This fire was not the gentle warmth of peace, or the bright light of hope. It was a relentless blaze fueled by rage, survival, and the brutal lessons of countless wars long past. Selene walked through the corridors of the Resolute, her steps steady but her mind racing. The ship was alive with activity. Engineers worked tirelessly to repair damaged systems, medics tended to the wounded, and soldiers prepared for the next inevitable battle. Outside the viewports, the void stretched endlessly, filled with the cold glow of distant stars and the deadly silence of space. She remembered Warlord Gaius Ren's words from their first meeting: "This world is weak, but it can be made strong. If you learn to fight like us, you will live." Those words had become a mantra for the fleet, a harsh truth that cut deeper than any blade. Earth's old values had been stripped away, replaced by a brutal code of survival. The question that haunted Selene now was whether this fire, the fire of war and vengeance, could ever be controlled, or if it would consume everything it touched. The Dread Fleet had brought power, yes, but also chaos. There were whispers among the soldiers and commanders about the cost of their savage tactics. Some feared that in fighting monsters, humanity was becoming one. The civilians on Earth grew restless, watching black warships patrol the skies, wondering if their protectors were any better than the enemy. Selene knew she had to keep control, to temper the flame before it burned the world to ashes. Intelligence reports came in steadily, telling of new Karnix movements and strange signals from the edges of human-controlled space. The Queen's psychic scream had been a warning, but now there were signs of deeper horrors, hive expansions, alien alliances, and deadly new weaponry that twisted flesh and machine into one. Preparing for the next battle was more than a matter of ships and weapons. It was a race against time and madness. Selene convened a council aboard the flagship, bringing together commanders of Earth's fleet and the war clans. The room buzzed with tension as plans were laid bare. "We cannot wait for the enemy to strike first," Selene declared, her voice firm. "We must bring the fire to them, strike their hives, destroy their leaders, and break their will to fight." Ren, though wounded, stood beside her, his presence a dark reassurance. "This fire will not forgive weakness," he warned. "If we falter, we die." The fleet prepared for a daring assault on a massive Karnix hive, rumored to be hidden within a dying star system. The operation was dangerous. Approaching a star meant risking deadly radiation and unstable gravity fields. But the prize was worth it. Destroying the hive could cripple the enemy's power for months, maybe years. As ships moved through the star system's outer edges, tension mounted. The Dread Fleet warriors tightened their grips on weapons, eyes scanning the darkness for signs of the enemy. Selene stood on the command deck, watching the star flare in the distance, a brilliant, angry light that seemed to pulse with menace. Suddenly, alarms screamed through the ship. The Karnix had sprung a trap. From the star's glare, dark shapes darted like shadows, fast attack vessels, their designs strange and terrifying. The battle erupted without warning. Explosions lit the void as ships collided and fired in a deadly dance of death. The Dread Fleet's ruthless tactics were tested to the limit. Selene directed the fight with cold focus, sending fighters to intercept while ordering capital ships to hold the line. Boarding parties launched into enemy vessels, fighting in tight corridors and dark holds. The smell of burning circuits mixed with alien blood, the air thick with fear and determination. In the chaos, Selene saw comrades fall, felt the sting of loss deep in her bones. The star's gravity twisted their movements, making every maneuver dangerous. Despite the fierce resistance, the Karnix fought back with savage intelligence. Their ships seemed alive, reacting to every attack with brutal efficiency. The psychic screams of the Queen echoed in the minds of some crew, driving them to the brink of madness. But the Dread Fleet's fire did not falter. Ren's warriors pushed forward, breaking through the enemy's front lines and setting charges in the hive's heart. Selene personally led a strike team into the hive's core, navigating the alien tunnels with no map and no mercy. The hive was a nightmare of living walls and pulsating flesh, the air thick with an alien scent that turned stomachs. The deeper they went, the more the alien life tried to crush them: tentacles, spores, and psychic attacks that bent reality. The team fought tooth and nail, losing many along the way. Finally, they reached the heart, a monstrous egg chamber glowing with unholy light. With grim determination, they set their explosives and raced back as the hive began to collapse. Outside, the fleet fled the dying star system, battered but victorious. The hive exploded in a terrible fireball, sending waves of energy rippling through space. The cost had been high, but the fire had burned brighter than before. Yet, even as the flames died, a new fear took hold. The Karnix Queen's psychic scream was louder now, filled with rage and promise of terrible vengeance. The war was far from over. Back on Earth, the people waited in uneasy silence. The fire that protected them also threatened to consume them. Celine understood that victory came with a price. The burning fire of war did not forgive weakness, and it did not forget. As she looked to the stars, she knew the next battle would be darker, more savage. But Earth would stand, because the fire within its defenders burned too fiercely to die. And in the endless cold of space, that fire was the only light left. The dark skies over Earth burned red with warning lights as the Karnak's forces made their final push. Captain Celine Drey stood on the bridge of the Resolute, her eyes fixed on the swirling mass of alien ships gathering beyond the atmosphere. Every crackle over the comms reminded her that the monsters who had stalked the galaxy for centuries were here, ready to crush humanity's last bastion. The Dread Fleet, once scattered survivors and ruthless fighters from countless wars, had become Earth's fiercest shield. But Celine knew their savage strength came with a price. Fear and suspicion simmered among the fleet's ranks, as harsh as the battles they had fought. The monsters who defended home were not saints. They were hunters shaped by war, tempered by blood and fire. And now, with the Karnak's queen rallying her forces, even those monsters faced a threat unlike any before. The enemy was relentless. Their ships moved with terrible speed and purpose, weapons blazing like comets tearing through space. The skies erupted into firestorms as Earth's orbital defenses flared to life. Massive cannons thundered, and fighter squadrons swarmed into the fray, their cries lost amid the roar of war. The Resolute weaved through the chaos, Celine's hands steady as she directed her fleet. This was no time for hesitation. She had to hold the line no matter the cost. Boarding parties launched like wolves into the enemy hulls, fighting brutal close-quarters battles in the dark corridors of alien vessels. Human and Karnak's warriors clashed in deadly duels, steel and plasma cutting through flesh and metal alike. The sounds of battle echoed through the ship's comms, shouts, screams, the clash of blades, and the sickening hiss of alien technology breaking apart. Celine's heart pounded with every report of victory or loss. Around her, the crew moved like shadows, driven by the knowledge that if they failed, Earth would be lost. As the battle raged, a sudden shift caught everyone's attention. The Karnak's queen's monstrous flagship, an enormous living fortress pulsing with dark energy, entered the fight. Her presence was a psychic thunderclap that shook minds and souls. The queen's voice echoed in the thoughts of every soldier, a maddening chorus promising destruction and despair. Celine felt the pull herself, a cold grip around her mind, but she fought it down with everything she had. This was the moment when monsters had to become legends. The Dread Fleet's fiercest warriors formed a desperate assault team to strike at the Queen's flagship. Celine volunteered to lead them, knowing that only by facing the enemy directly could the tide of war be turned. They moved like ghosts through the chaos, weaving past explosions and enemy fire. Every second brought them closer to the beating heart of the alien horror. On board the Queen's ship, the air was thick with an otherworldly energy. The walls seemed alive, pulsing with alien flesh and glowing veins. The warriors advanced through labyrinthine halls, fighting off swarms of Karnak's guards and twisted creatures born from the darkest depths of nightmare. Celine's blade sang as it cut through enemy ranks, but the Queen's psychic presence was everywhere, testing their minds, turning fear into rage and rage into survival. They reached the chamber where the Queen herself waited, a towering figure wreathed in shadow and light, her eyes burning with hatred and cunning. The battle was fierce and primal. Celine's team fought with everything they had, their strength fueled by the fire to protect their home. The Queen lashed out with psychic waves, crushing steel and bone, but the warriors pressed forward, their will unbroken. Finally, Celine struck a blow that shattered the Queen's armor, a burst of light and sound that shook the very ship. The Queen screamed, a sound that echoed through space and time, before she retreated into the shadows, wounded but alive. The flagship began to collapse, fires breaking out in every corridor, alarms blaring the call to abandon ship. Celine ordered her team to retreat, but not before planning charges to destroy the alien vessel once and for all. As they fled, the ship erupted in a cataclysmic explosion, sending waves of energy and debris hurtling into space. The battle was won, but the war was not over. Earth's defenders watched the horizon, knowing that monsters did not always come from outside. Sometimes, the fiercest monsters were the ones who fought for home. Celine looked to the stars, her heart heavy but resolute. The fire that protected Earth would burn on, unforgiving, relentless, and alive with the spirit of those who refused to fall. In the end, it was not just technology or weapons that would save humanity, but the monsters who stood ready to defend it, no matter the cost.